Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, we humbly bow at thy feet. Divine Mother, we are your children. Guide our thoughts, guide our actions, guide our speech and our words, that they may reflect thy bliss, thy love, thy freedom. Om, peace. Amen. We'll begin with the chant. Let's meditate now for about 10 minutes. Taking the deep feeling of devotional offering into meditation, offering our heart's love up to the real altar of spirit at the point between the eyebrows. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good evening from Ananda Village in California. Here it's early morning, it's 6:15 in the morning. For those of you who haven't been here before, it's a beautiful forest setting. On the way here I saw many deer and a skunk. I often see foxes on the road. And I invite all of our friends in India to visit here sometime. My name is Nayaswami Devarshi, and I live here, and I'll be actually visiting all of you in India. I leave next Monday for India, spending time mostly in Gurgaon at our center there, and also the NCR region. And I will be visiting Pune and Mumbai while I'm visiting. Today's topic is Think Before You Speak, the reading from Swami Kriyanandaji's Living Wisely, Living Well for November 19. Think before you speak. Be circumspect both in speech and in deed. Don't, by unseemly haste, expose yourself to misunderstandings. Why embroil yourself in unnecessary controversy? Very, very wise words here. I think all of us at some time or another have said words in haste or anger or irritation which we deeply regretted afterwards because we maybe hurt someone that we loved or we caused misunderstanding by not thinking before we speak. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, but also just about how to work with our consciousness and how that affects the way that we speak, the power of our words, and even the quality of our voice. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna hints at how we do this. Chapter 17, verse 15, he says, and he's talking about the various austerities that he describes, austerities of the body, of the mind, of action, but he also specifically talks about speech. In chapter 17, verse 15, speech that is pleasant, beneficial, and truthful, without being offensive. The repetition of japa and recitation of the scriptures, these are called the austerities of speech. And Swami Kriyananda, in his explanation of these different austerities that Krishna is talking about in the Gita, he says these sattvic austerities are the natural products of an uplifted consciousness. Austerity in this context, therefore, suggests no grim efforts at self-restraint, but is a natural offering up of the mind into superconsciousness. And he really, in there, he explains how our speech becomes true, how it becomes kind, how we avoid saying things that we didn't really want to say. And it comes from the very root cause of all our problems, but also of all of our solutions, which is changing one's consciousness. A very interesting experiment was done here with a group of our students who were preparing for residency at Ananda. And their experiment was that they each had to give a short talk on a spiritual subject. And so they had them studying the subject, reading books, and then give the talk. And they just looked at how the talk was, and it was partly a lesson in how to share these great teachings. Then they asked them, do it again, but this time instead of reading and studying, just meditate. Meditate for 15 minutes, half an hour before your talk. And then see how the two talks that you gave differed. And the second talk that they gave was invariably much deeper, more profound, more clear. And it was because they changed their consciousness. And this is something that Swamiji taught us often over the years, and we watched his example also, that when giving a public talk, one wants to meditate beforehand. And the most important thing that one can do is change one's consciousness to tune into the divine current, to tune into divine joy, to tune into divine wisdom, more with intuition than with reason. Although when we speak, of course, we're also using reason because we have to make our ideas very clear. And so, if you're ever in the situation, I think most of us at one time or another are, whether in a business, giving a business presentation, even in such a technical situation as that, meditate beforehand if you can. Center yourself. Also, of course, compose your ideas and try to be clear in your own self what you're trying to say. But you'll find that if you're very calm, you're not agitated, your consciousness is clear, you're tuning in to the divine current, it really changes not just the sort of the technical or the verbal quality of what you're saying, but also the power of your voice, the power of your consciousness is much more readily conveyed when you are centered in that way before you speak. There's a very interesting story of the Christian saint, Saint Anthony of the Desert. He spent, I don't know how many decades in the desert in seclusion, praying, meditating as a hermit. He became very, very deeply respected as a saint because of his many experiences of God and of the divine and miracles that happened around him. And people would sometimes go to him for spiritual advice. And at one point, this was very early in the history of the Christian church, there was a great dispute and controversy over whether Christ was just a man or whether he was the Son of God or an avatar or a child of God, a really pure, direct expression of God. And it was a great controversy in the early church. And there was a lot of arguments and discussion, and they would have scholars come and explain one side and explain the other side. And finally, somebody thought, let's see what St. Anthony thinks about this subject. And they went and got him very deep in the desert. He was as far away from people as he could get. And they brought him into this large hall where all these scholars and priests were arguing these great issues of the day. And they wanted his opinion. St. Anthony, all he did was he stood up and he said 4 words. He said, "I have seen him." That's all he said. And it quieted the crowd. And the power of not just his conviction and his experience of having seen Christ and seeing him as God, but the vibration even in his voice and his words, that's all they needed to hear. They didn't need to hear any scholarly argument from him. All they needed to hear was those 4 words, "I have seen him." And that was enough to completely sway people in the direction of understanding that this Christ that they had been trying to understand in those early days was a Son of God, was a great master. And so the power of our words is very often separate or not directly tied to even what we are saying. It doesn't have to necessarily be the most reasonable argument, but it can often just be the most direct. But when said with the power of experience of God, of the divine, coming from meditation and divine experience, words carry a great deal of power. And so this kind of touches on the quality of one's voice when we speak. Swami Kriyananda was really an extraordinary example of so many things. One of them was the power and the quality of just his voice. He was an extraordinary singer, and he could have probably been a great famous singer because of the quality of his voice, which he did not obviously want to do. But the vibration of his voice had a really deep spiritual magnetism. He commented one time, interestingly, that because I think partly there were a lot of recordings of his voice made and people heard a lot of his talks, he commented that many people knew him more by his voice than by sight. And he had this experience once when he was traveling, I think on vacation, and someone saw him and didn't recognize him, but just in casual conversation they heard his voice, and they said, "Oh, you're Swami Kriyananda." And they recognized him entirely by his voice and not by his face. because his voice was really uniquely powerful. And he taught people when they spoke to try to work with the quality of their voice. And I'll talk about different ways that you can do this, because also the quality and vibration of one's voice is really, really helpful in conveying vibration and in discussion, and also just in teaching, for those of you who share the yoga teachings. You'll find that people who are very, very worldly, for example, their voices are have a sort of almost a cynical sound to them in the way they talk, and maybe they're just very strained and just very tight, and people who are tense, the voice conveys that quality. People who are very soft and devotional, the voice tends to carry that vibration also. So be aware of how your voice sounds, and be more conscious of not only the words that you're saying, but the vibration in the sound itself. All sound, in a sense, and in the truest spiritual sense, comes from the original sound, which is Om. In the beginning was the Word, is how the Bible says it. And in the great scriptures, the Vedas, God first comes as vibration out of infinite spirit. God moved and created vibration, and this vibration was the vibration of Om. And this vibration of Om permeates and created and is the origin of the entire universe, which is all cosmic vibration. Even scientists understand that light, sound, and even matter in the end are energy and vibration. And so vibration really is at the core of everything, of who we are and what we do. And so again, the voice really can convey a great deal more than just ideas. There are ways that we can develop our voice. It's very interesting. At Ananda Village, nearly everybody at some point takes part in one of our choirs where they sing Swami Kriyananda's music. And even people who have never learned music, who don't necessarily even know how to sing, what they find, and what I found in my own experience here, in my many decades at Ananda, is that when you sing uplifting music, Swami Kriyananda's music, devotional chanting, that over time it actually changes the sound of your voice. And it's almost like, well, Yogananda said that the instrument is blessed by that which flows through it. And when you are an instrument for the expression of divine upliftment in music and chanting, it actually starts to change the quality of your voice so that it becomes blessed in a way. Really anything that we offer to God in meditation, with devotion, becomes sacred. Now when we do a puja and we offer herbs and prasad and other things and offer it to the divine, those things become blessed. In the same way, when we offer ourselves to God in service, in devotion, in prayer and meditation, our entire beings become blessed. And when we sing divine chanting, when we sing divine music, our voices become blessed. Swamiji sometimes would tell a very interesting story. It was about the American psychic. His name was Edgar Casey. And a woman went to him for a psychic reading to find out her past lives. And this woman was a professional. She had a profession because she had extraordinarily beautiful hands. And she was a hand model where photographers would use her hands in different advertisements and different things. And she made a living just from the beauty of her hands. And so during this reading that she had, Edgar Casey said that in a previous lifetime, she was a nun in a convent, and she spent many hours with very deep devotion scrubbing the floor and cleaning the floors with her hands, offering her actions to God. And because of that, her very hands became blessed and became beautiful. Now, I imagine there were maybe other nuns who were washing the same floors, but who were probably gritting their teeth and not very happy about doing it, and their hands were not blessed. This woman, because she was doing it as a sacred offering with deep devotion, her very hands became blessed. And so, whatever we offer to the divine in service, in giving to others, in deep devotion becomes sacred and becomes sanctified and becomes blessed. And it's the same with the human voice. When we sing divine music, the voice becomes blessed. When we talk about God, the whole instrument of our entire being becomes blessed. So you'll see, and this is the beautiful thing over the years at Ananda, is seeing how people's voices change over the years until they become more and more beautiful over time, and they can sing beautifully. Again, people who were never singers before they came here. And so just understand that when we act in any way in service and devotion, we become blessed, and especially with singing and chanting, our very voices become blessed. I'm going to talk a little bit about devotional chanting, because Paramahansa Yogananda, he presented a way of devotional chanting that was kind of different than what is commonly practiced. Yogananda came to bring a new understanding of the true and ancient teachings. But the reason great masters come now and again is because people start getting into a rut of habit or dogma or superstition, or they don't really understand the inner way of doing something. And so he really came to revolutionize and present anew these ancient teachings and in new ways of doing them, but really in the old traditional way of doing them. And one of them was devotional chanting, because his way of devotional chanting was actually very different from what you commonly see in East and West. It's especially common in the West now with devotional chanting to have these large kirtan gatherings that are in some ways almost like a rock concert, where it's very active and rajasic chanting, which can be very sweet and energizing, but it ends there. It just ends with this churning and energetic chanting. And what Yogananda taught was chanting as a way of awakening devotion and then interiorizing it. And what he taught was to chant with this deep consciousness, not trying to shout and wake up God, because we're the ones who need to be woken up, not God, but to awaken our devotion, and then we take that devotion, interiorize it, and take it into deep meditation. I'm going to read something that Swami Kriyananda said about devotional chanting. And he said that, and I'll quote him, he said, "Words are thoughts crystallized. Melodies are the resonance of the heart's aspirations. Harmonies deepen the emotional power of those aspirations, and rhythms ground those aspirations in the present. Combining thought, melody, and rhythm in a spiritual discipline can provide a powerful force for awakening." And here he's talking about especially devotional chanting. And he goes on, "The spiritual purpose of chanting is not to develop powers, but to give one control over the mind, that he may direct it one pointedly towards God. If chants and mantras can bestow power over objective nature, how much greater their effectiveness when their aim is to benefit the chanter himself. The highest purpose of chanting is to help awaken us to our own spiritual potential, to bring us closer to self-realization." He says, and goes on, "Spiritual chanting is heartfelt prayer, deepened by the dimension of music and by the building power of repetition. Repetition is not for the purpose of getting the Lord's attention. It is to deepen the intensity of one's own prayer. To repeat a chant mechanically in a sing-song manner has virtually no spiritual value. Spiritual chanting is different from singing songs or hymns." And he mentions all the songs that he has sung, over, I think, 400 songs, for instruction, inspiration, and reflection is the purpose of them. Such music serves a different purpose, however. Though it may inspire, it doesn't lift the mind into a meditative state, which is really the deep purpose of spiritual chanting. You'll find that if you apply this deep attention to your overall approach, your attitude, the focus, and especially the feeling with which you perform any action, in this case, devotional chanting, it also applies to meditation, you'll find that the benefits and the results are 100-fold or 1,000-fold. It's like this with the technique of Kriya Yoga, for those of you who have it, but really any techniques of meditation this applies to. If you do these things mechanically, yes, the way that they're taught in terms of the technique, but just mechanically, you'll get a little bit of benefit from them. But if you do them with deep consciousness, with deep attention, with deep devotion, with self-offering, then the real power that these things have to transform us really comes into play. This is why Yogananda said about even the Kriya technique. He said Kriya plus devotion works like mathematics. And when you combine technique, proper technique, with deep devotional feeling, then the power that these things have to change us are, again, multiplied 100 or 1,000 times. With chanting, again, I will continue with what Swami Kriyananda says about how to use devotional chanting to really transform our consciousness. He says the art of chanting correctly is first to practice it with full awareness of its inner purpose. That purpose is not to awaken sentiments or to stir up the emotions. It is to focus the heart's feelings and raise them towards superconsciousness. Loud chanting does have its place. It is good at the start of meditation, not for the reason that this priest, he told the story about a priest who said we must chant loudly to wake up God and get his attention. Loud chanting is not for the reason that priest gave, but to command attention from our own minds. For loud chanting creates a magnetic flow. Like a mighty river, it can dissolve the eddies of thought and feeling that meander idly along the banks of the mind. Like a magnetic military leader, it commands attention from your thought soldiers and fires them with zeal. Once you've got their attention, chant more softly, more inwardly. Direct your energy upward now, from the heart to the spiritual eye. Once your conscious mind is wholly engaged in chanting, bring it down into the subconscious by whispering. While chanting in the subconscious, offer the chant there too, up to superconsciousness at the point between the eyebrows, until you feel your entire being vibrating with the words, the melody, and the rhythm. And so you'll see when Yogananda taught and practiced chanting, at first it would be loud, and then quieter and more inwardly, and then whispering. And even then there's a deeper level of chanting, which is to take that chant beyond words into the feeling of the chant, and then into deep meditation. I've had this interesting experience with the technique of Kriya Yoga, because we've seen over the years that when you practice Kriya with deep devotion, that it has much, much more power to transform the consciousness and to change the person who's practicing it. And normally, we're taught to do a little bit of Hong Sau practice and get centered before we do the Kriya technique. But those of you who have Kriya, but even other techniques of deep meditation, experiment with this. And sometime when you have a deep, uplifting experience of devotional chanting, as you take that chant interiorized and whisper it and take it into deep feeling, take that deep devotional feeling directly into the practice of the technique of Kriya. And do it as Swami Kriyananda said, every Kriya should be an act of devotional self-offering. And you'll find that when you imbue a technique with the deep devotion that's awakened by the deeper devotional chanting, not just by the outward, loud, quick, energetic devotional chanting, you will find that techniques are really, really empowered when they're imbued with deep, deep devotion. And so practice devotional chanting, but practice all of your actions with attention to the approach, the feeling, and the attitude with which you do these things. It's very, very similar with the power of affirmation. Yogananda was one of the very early and maybe first pioneer, at least in the West, of using positive affirmations to change one's consciousness. And these are taking words, because again, words, Yogananda said, words are like bullets. They have power to them. And so with affirmations, when you take a positive statement, and Yogananda gave many affirmations, and Swami Kriyananda Ji did also, and their words, their affirmations have power to begin with, so it's actually good to use words that they've already empowered. But when we repeat them, first loudly, more quietly, and then whispering, and then just mentally, and then more as feeling and power, those words coming through affirmations have a real power to transform our consciousness. And finally, the way to take chanting really deeply, Swamiji says, he says, at last, chant only mentally, at the point between the eyebrows. Let your absorption lift you into superconsciousness. Once it does so, and once you receive a divine response, you will have spiritualized that chant. From then on, anytime you sing that chant, it will quickly carry you again to superconsciousness, as if on a magic carpet. I've had this experience where I've had certain experiences with very specific chants, a deep experience, and any time after that, when I sing that chant, it has a much, much more power to it. So work at spiritualizing some chants. You can have a handful of chants in your arsenal of chants that you can go back to and really use them as great help and support in times of need, in times where you want to meditate deeply, because chants that not only that the Guru has spiritualized by writing it and putting it to music, but that we've also spiritualized ourselves by having a deep experience with that chant, are almost like very, very good friends in the power that they have to uplift us and to help us. Swamiji talks about a way to spiritualize a chant. He says, to spiritualize a chant, keep it rotating in the mind for days at a time if necessary, not only in meditation, but as you go about your daily activities. This practice is also called japa. Christian mystics, too, speak of the continuous prayer of the heart and of practicing the presence of God. All this is japa. And so you'll find that when your words are directed more in a devotional direction, chanting, affirmation, talking to God, talking to others in devotional ways, you'll find that your voice changes, your consciousness changes, and you'll find that the words you speak have more power. One last thing I just wanted to mention is that try to avoid talking too much. You'll see that people who talk all the time, are constantly chattering, that their voice generally does not have much power to it. It's just flitting along the surface, almost like a bird chirping in the background. And you find that people who speak less, that when they do speak, like Saint Anthony of the Desert, when he spoke those 4 words, that those words that you speak have more power and consciousness. So be more conscious in the way that we speak, the vibration of our voice, and try to understand that if we can change our consciousness before we speak and come from a deeper center of devotional awareness, of wisdom, that then our words will convey our own inner consciousness rather than expressing restless attitudes or anger or irritation. So again, change yourself inside and it will find positive expression in your words and in all of your actions. So may the light and the bliss of our masters guide us and bless us along this way. Om Shanti Shanti.